and we are going to discuss what is hypothesis. So this is the agenda of my talk. We will discuss general research process very briefly. Then what do you mean by a hypothesis? The characters of hypothesis. Then what are the sources of hypothesis and what are the different types of the hypothesis. In between, we will also discuss the nature of the hypothesis and so on and so forth. So this is what is the research process at a glance. So when you approached your guide after passing your net, set, or maybe PET or GET, you have approached your guide. You might have discussed your views with your guide, or the guide might have expressed his views with you that okay, here there are lacunae are there and there is a potential that we can work in this area, and vice versa. And then you must have formulated your research problem. Okay, so upon the agreement from the both parties, you and your guide, you have come to the conclusion, okay, this is my potential area and here I am going to work. And then you have formulated your research problem, and accordingly to write the synopsis, your guide must have asked you to do the literature review. Otherwise the actual formulation of the research would not have been possible. So you might have done the extensive research review or literature review, and then you must have come to know, okay, whatever topic, whatever problem that I'm going to encounter or I'm going to undertake has a wide gap with respect to the research, and then you have developed the research hypothesis. So this is what is the beginning of your research career. And then you must have prepared the research designing. Okay, this is how I'm going to proceed further. These are my objectives, these are my aims, and to fulfill these aims and objectives, these are the methodologies that I'm going to work with. And then after preparing the research design, then determine the research design. Which research design are you going to use, whether it is a survey based or whether it's a wet lab or dry lab. If you are from the agricultural field, maybe random block design or CBD or RBD, and so on and so forth. And then now some of you must have started your research lately, some of you have completed maybe 1 year or 2 year. So in that process you might have started collecting the data, then the execution of the project. After you collect the data, then the important task is analysis of the data. This is again very broad and very important step, analysis of data, because we all collect the data immensely. But it was my experience that even I did my PhD, I collected the data, but at a point when I sat for the analysis of data, I got stuck because I did not know what to do with that data, which test to apply, whether I should apply the T test or Z test or the ANOVA, or should I go for regression or correlation, or I should apply the parametric test or non-parametric test. So being a researcher, you should have the knowledge, have expertise in the analysis of data yourself, because you cannot run after a statistician or knows and begging him to do the analysis. So it is better that you should get aware how to analyze the data. Anyway, and upon or after doing the analysis of the data, there comes what is called hypothesis testing. Whatever hypothesis that you have proposed, whether that hypothesis is true or it is not true. that is hypothesis. And based on the hypothesis, then you can write the results, you can go for the discussion, and you come with the conclusion. So you generalize, or generalization and interpretation of the data, and then this is the last step, that you prepare your thesis or you prepare your research article or maybe review, etc., or you go for the conference and then you present your results. So this is overall research process, and I purposely used the different color developing the research hypothesis. So this is what is very important. Now often we get confused between the two terms, assumption and hypothesis. Sometimes we assume, or assumption leads to the hypothesis. So is there any difference exists between the assumption and the hypothesis, or they are one and the same? So let us see that. Assumption and hypothesis often create a confusion, as both are widely used in the field of research. Suppose if you are a field botanist and you want to collect a particular plant or a particular organism, and you are talking amongst your friends, and maybe you say, okay, since this is the October or it is November, I assume that a particular plant would be there. But you have not hypothesized it, you have assumed it. So an assumption is about talking things for granted. You take for granted that your plant, your organism, your animal would be there while you visit that particular area, and then you cannot give, or you do not have any firm explanation behind it, you just assume. Or maybe if it is a Sunday and you want to hang out, and then you say to your friend, okay, I assume that the McDonald's would be open, or cafe coffee day would be there, or they may be serving coffee of your choice. So you assume. And another thing is that when you assume, you consider that assumption to be true. When I say that, okay, I am now culturing a particular bacteria, or maybe I am going to set up that experiment, and I assume that I will get the proper results. So you have already defined your assumption to be true. But of course, the assumption may or may not be verified or investigated. There are certain assumptions are there which cannot be verified or which cannot be investigated. For example, I assume that there is a life on Mars. Unless you are a hardcore NASA committee, you cannot verify or you cannot investigate whether really there is life on Mars, or maybe on Phobos, or maybe any of the moon of the Jupiter, or maybe on the Pluto, or outside our Milky Way. However, a hypothesis is an uncertain supposition or explanation regarding the phenomenon or event. So on the other hand, what is a hypothesis? It is uncertain supposition. For example, suppose you are working, I don't know your topics, but suppose you are working on anti-cancer activity of certain plant or certain mushroom or certain fungi. You have proposed hypothesis, but you are not sure, or at this present moment you cannot explain whether the plant will show anti-cancer activity or not, or whether a particular event will occur or not. You have hypothesized it. And hypothesis is considered to be true by the researcher as that of the assumption, because you also assume the assumption to be true, you also consider the hypothesis to be true. However, What is the main or what is the significant difference between assumption and a hypothesis? Assumption may or may not be verified or it cannot be investigated. However, a hypothesis must always go through a process of verification and investigation. So this is the main difference. Whatever you have hypothesized, now you are struggling to get those results for these many years, and you assume that my hypothesis is correct. I am going to get whatever I have proposed in my synopsis. Further, the hypothesis can always be tested by experimentation after the formulation. So, after you formulate the hypothesis, that can always be tested through the experimentation. Not only one experiment, but you rigorously do triplicate, isn't it? It is said that one must carry at least 3 times the experiment. So, your n is equal to 3. No matter, you continue doing it for longer period of time as per the time and money and all things, but more times the experiment is done, you are going to get the proper result. But that is not the case with the assumption. You cannot test the assumption by formulating any experiments or formulating through any formulations. And in the hypothesis, what does researcher do? It collects all the possible evidences to proceed further, and the investigation is carried out to test the hypothesis. So whatever objectives that you have put forth in your synopsis, now you are doing experiments to fulfill those objectives and ultimately to fulfill the hypothesis that you have proposed. So you must have given the heading that expected outcome, and you must have written that by doing this research, these are the expected outcome 1, 2, 3. So to fulfill that, you have proposed a hypothesis and you are doing experiments. So in research, assumptions are formulated, and on the basis of the assumption, certain hypothesis statements are declared. Again, although assumption and the hypothesis, they are not you can say exactly equal, but based on certain assumptions, you propose the hypothesis, and therefore the hypothesis can also be considered as an assumption that is taken to be true unless proven otherwise. But for assumption, you take the statement always true, but that is not the case with the hypothesis. If you are following me so far, just put a thumb emoji so I can understand you are following me. Okay, fine. So the hypothesis must be tested experimentally, but assumption, it is taken all the time true, and that is not the case with the hypothesis, because uh, we will see the types of hypothesis, and one of the types of hypothesis is null hypothesis, and we deal with the null hypothesis very often, H0 and H1, or alternate hypothesis and null hypothesis. So you first assume the null hypothesis to be true, and then you do the statistical analysis to prove the null hypothesis or to disprove the null hypothesis. So that is why it says that the hypothesis can also be considered as an assumption that is taken to be true unless proven otherwise. So you have to prove your hypothesis, but that is not the case with the assumption. So this is a cartoon. In the left hand side, there is a person who is maybe blindfolded, facing otherwise to the crowd below, and this person is thinking, when I jump, I assume that these people will catch me. He is not proposing a hypothesis, he is not testing the validity of the hypothesis. He is not doing the experiments, but he just consider the assumption that my friends will catch me and they will not let me fall down. Whereas in the right hand side, isolated island, there is one tree, coconut tree, two people, and the first says that okay, let us use consumers to validate our hypothesis, and the second says, oh, what consumers? So there is nobody to test the hypothesis, yet the fellow is proposing the hypothesis. Okay, then etymology of the hypothesis, how this word has come, what is the meaning of hypothesis? So hypothesis word comes from the ancient Greek hypothesis, that means base or basis of an argument or supposition, or it is literally meaning a placing under. So you put a base for your research, you lay a foundation of the hypothesis for your research, or you form a basis of an argument or supposition. Similarly, the hypothesis also has a root in the Latin, and this word is recorded since 1596 from the Middle French word hypothesis. So hypo is under, thesis is placing proposition. So it literally means a placing under, or a base, or a groundwork, or a foundation, and it can be used in extended manner, that is, it is the basis of an argument or it is the basis of a supposition. Further, so what is hypothesis? Again, hypo plus thesis. Hypo means tentative or subject to the verification, but the assumption is not. So hypothesis is always subjected to the verification. And thesis means statement about solution of the problem. So whatever statement that you have put forth, whatever problem that you have put forth, you have to give the solutions to that problem. And therefore the hypothesis is nothing but it is a tentative statement about the solution of a problem. So you put forth a problem, you do the experiments, and then you prove the hypothesis or the statement that you have proposed for your research work. So through the hypothesis, a solution of a problem is verified empirically. Empirically means it is verified by the observations or the experiments. Say I want to test the anti-cancer activity, or I have suppose a very big forest and I am working on a speciation or maybe certain ecological aspects. So I must go there, I must collect the observations, or I must do the experiments, and I must put forth the problem solutions to the problem that we have envisaged. Similarly, it is based on some rationale. The rationale is a set of reasons or the logical basis for a course of action or the belief. So that is what is the hypothesis. I'm sure now you are all clear with what is hypothesis. Now these are the formal definitions. Okay, you can read it. I will not pronounce them, but I must ask you to concentrate your attention to the words that are there in the yellow. Any supposition which makes in order to endeavor to deduce conclusion. So that is J.S. Mill. Or it is a shrewd guess or inference that is formulated and provisionally adapted to explain, or by John Best, or a hypothesis is a tentative generalization. Then George J. Molly, hypothesis is an assumption. So, supposition or tentative generalization, or it is an assumption, or it is a shrewd guess, or statement temporarily accepted to be true, or statement temporarily accepted as a true. So, when you propose the hypothesis or when you propose the statement, you temporarily consider it to be true, and accordingly you collect the data by designing the experiments, and then after testing, after analysis of the data, then you test the hypothesis whether your statement is true or not true, right? So all these scientists, they are speaking the same thing about what is a hypothesis. It is a statement, or it is a guess, or it is a temporary statement, or it is an assumption, or a tentative generalization. But nobody says that it is considered to be true, as like the assumption. The hypothesis can only be proved to be true after you collect the data, after you do the experiments, and you test the experiment, and unless and otherwise you get the statistical significance, you are not going to consider hypothesis to be true. Okay. Now, what is the importance of hypothesis? So it plays important role in the research, and some of the importances are like it helps in the testing of the theories. Suppose you come with the theory, or you come with some statement that there is a life on the Saturn, or I have read these many books, or these many theological books or religious books, and all says that there is a life on the Saturn. So I propose my hypothesis. And once you propose the hypothesis, then accordingly you have to do the experiments. Maybe you have to pay visit to the Saturn very often, loiter there, collect the data, come back to Earth, come back to your lab, sit there, analyze the data, and then you can say, okay, based on my observations, based on the theory that I have proposed, based on my data, my hypothesis is true that there is a life on the Saturn, or otherwise it is not there. Then hypothesis sometimes suggest theories, new theories, or it modifies the previously existing theory. Again, second point is a territory of analysis, because every time you cannot consider everything to be true. Like, say for example, the green color of a leaves is because of chlorophyll. That is a well-known example and well-known accepted theory. But suppose you do the rigorous experiments, there are say hundred and thousands of papers are there. They are stating that the green color of a plant is because of the chlorophyll. But after you do rigorous experiments, you come across with a striking result that chlorophyll is not a green, or it is not imparting a green color to the plant, but it is something else. So you have come across with a new theory. Then hypotheses serve as an important base in the investigation activities, because since we are all science students, I say students because I am also in a learning phase, so I am a student. So do you. So being science student, we cannot utter a word or a sentence without any basis, or whatever statement, research statement that you have put forth in your synopsis has some basis. You have not put it blindly, you have not put it haphazardly, randomly, isn't it? Your supervisor might have tested whether this is correct or not, and then he must have given you a green signal. Okay, go ahead with this. The hypothesis provides guidance to the research work or study. Again, you cannot go on doing research blindly. You must have some foundation. You must set up the experiment to satisfy your aims. or in other words, your hypothesis. Hypothesis helps in understanding and knowing the need of the data, what kind of data you require, how to collect it, how to interpret, what are the possibilities of collecting the data, and plus it may explain social phenomena. Hypothesis explain social phenomena. And hypothesis leads to the development of theory. Whatever you are doing, you need, because there is a gap in the research. So after you complete your thesis, after you complete your research, you come across or you come up with your theory. This is my theory. This is what I have done, and this was the gap which I have filled with my research. Similarly, the hypothesis also act as a bridge between the theory and the investigation. Say for example, I don't know whether you believe on spiritual things and the meditation or etc etc etc, but it is said that the pineal gland which is there in our brain, it is said to be the door for the other world. This is my theory. This has been put forth in many religious book, whatever religion that you follow. Of course, it may not be given directly, but indirectly. That when you meditate and when you go to what is called samadhi, then you can contact, you can have communication between you and the God. Science says that it is the pineal gland which helps. So, what is the phenomenon? You are talking with the God, but whether really the pineal gland is really the door or it is really involved in this or not, that you want to test. This is your theory and you want to test it by empirical testing. You are going to set up the experiments, you are going to test, you are going to collect the data, and maybe then you are going to establish the relation between the samadhi or the at most enchantment, must I say that. So is there relationship between the enchantment and the pineal gland? Similarly, the hypothesis helps in knowing the most suitable technique of analysis. That is what I have said. Statistical analysis. Which technique you have to adopt? Whether simply by explaining the mean, you come across with theory, or you simply calculate the median, or mean plus standard deviation, or coefficient of variance, or standard error, or you should go for the t-test, again one-way test or two-way test, or z-test or the f-test, or ANOVA, maybe how many variables are there, one-way ANOVA or two-way ANOVA, or you should go for the correlation or the regression, or maybe beyond the regression you go for the neural network and the machine learning or whatnot. So based on your hypothesis, you will decide what kind of data and how to collect the data, and the data itself will tell you how to do the analysis, and it helps in determining the most suitable type of research. Then nature of hypothesis. So there are certain natures are there. So conceptual hypothesis. What is a conceptual hypothesis? Basically, it involves some kind of ideas or the concepts. As the name is conceptual. It has some key concepts. And these concepts are the building blocks which help you on the action. So, for example, suppose is there this light affects the plant growth. My assumption. More of the plant growth. The plant growth. So this is assumption. So here the concept in my hypothesis will be and the plant growth. So this is a conceptual hypothesis. Second nature is verbal statement. So what is a verbal statement? Like before you approach to your guide, you may be thinking on what should I do for my PhD, what topic should I choose, or you might have randomly accessed the internet or maybe books or research articles, and maybe a statement might have formed at the back end of your mind. So that was just a verbal statement. Like my verbal statement is there is a life on the Saturn. This is my verbal statement. But when you put the hypothesis, when you write the hypothesis in a clear and the direct statement, so it is not just in your thoughts, but you have now put it on the paper. It is well defined. It is well defined statement which is ready to be tested through the empirical verification, that is experimental uh, experimentations or the data. Again, say for example, the plant which receives maximum sunlight grow taller, and the plants which receives less light, they